Members, good afternoon. We have apologies from Stephen Moutry, Michael Copeland, Brenda Hale, Alex Atwood and Megan Fearon. So we are it as far as today goes. On page 5 of your packs, members, there's a request from Ballinafie Community Development Association. The Development Association are seeking a meeting. They've had cuts in their funding. I previously met with a group in February to discuss those concerns, and the Deputy Chair and Brenda Hale also attended. Do members have any view on this, given the policy tends to be that we do not engage as a committee formally with individuals or single groups? What, Jimmy?
Well, I mean, Chair, you probably said it there. I think we'd be setting a very dangerous precedent. I mean, it's not the only group that's facing cuts across the board, and it's, if we start there, so how long is a piece of string in terms of bringing people in? So I would propose that we, I mean, if you've already met them, that the letter can be forwarded to the department. I think that's the best thing.
Yeah. Content? Okay, thank you. Page 7 then, there's an invitation from NIACRO. It's the first in a series of justice seminars for 2015-16. The date is Wednesday the 13th of May. The venue's the Long Gallery, and the guest speaker is Karen McCluskey, who's Director of the Scottish Violence Reduction Unit. Could I ask members to respond directly to NIACRO if they wish to attend? On Tuesday, I spoke as committee chair during the debate on the Committee for Finance and Personnel's report on sickness absence in the public sector. Absence levels in the department and OFMDFM haven't given us much cause for concern to date. It does fluctuate over recent years. We're aware that current financial pressures make it imperative for all departments to do as much as they can to reduce the cost of sickness absence, and indeed I think productivity was one of the key findings coming out of the debate. Are members content that we ask the department for a written briefing, certainly in the first instance, on performance for financial year 14-15 as soon as those figures are available, and we can take a decision thereafter? Thank you. In terms of invitations, there's a full list on page 9, members, and in the absence of comment on that, I would ask you if you are content with the draft minutes of our meeting of the 15th of April, which begin at page 11. Content? Thank you. A brief update on the position in respect of the Public Services Ombudsman Bill and the Ombudsman and Commissioner for Complaints Amendment Bill. I refer to tabled papers this time, members, on page 3. The Deputy Chair introduced the Public Services Ombudsperson's Bill on Monday past. Second stage is currently scheduled for Monday the 11th of May. Meanwhile, the Amendment Bill is to be introduced next Monday, the 27th, and as agreed last week, the committee has laid a motion requesting accelerated passage for that bill. At page 6 of tabled, you'll see that I've written to the Speaker to request advice regarding the absence of an appropriate committee to consider the explanation for why we're seeking accelerated passage. That's a requirement of standing orders. The Speaker replied in writing this morning, confirming the Business Committee is content that I provide the required explanation to the Assembly during the motion for accelerated passage. And that has also been provisionally scheduled for the 11th of May, along with the second stage of the Amendment Bill. Members content? Thank you. At our last meeting, we considered a request from children in Northern Ireland for a meeting to discuss the policy implications in respect of children and young people with regard to the reorganisation of government departments. That meeting has now been set 11 a.m. on Tuesday the 12th of May, and I extend an invitation to all committee members, and staff will circulate a reminder closer to that date. Next to page 19, where there's a list of outstanding correspondence. There is no comment on that. I'll move on to the correspondence summary sheet, which this week is on page 22, detailing correspondence received since our last meeting. There are just two items I'd like to highlight to you. Page 23 is a response from the department to our queries about urban villages following the briefing from the Landscape Institute and Northern Ireland Environment Link back in March, 18th of March. Are members content to include the response in the inquiry papers?
Agreed.
Thank you. And secondly, just draw your attention to correspondence at page 37. That's from the Committee for Finance and Personnel. They're requesting the Head of the Civil Service provide a briefing on the Public Sector Workforce Restructuring Steering Group, including information on the Civil Service Voluntary Exit Scheme. Any comments, members, on correspondence? No, okay. Next, the draft forward work programme from now to summer recess can be found on page 42 of your packs. I'd like to remind members our meeting next week has been brought forward to the Monday at 12:15 on the 27th of April. This meeting will finish off the evidence sessions on the Children's Services Cooperation Bill. We'll hear again from the Department and again from the bill sponsor. And I understand sandwiches will be provided from noon. Are members content with the proposed forward work programme? Yeah, thank you. So we move to our substantive business, the consideration of the Children's Services Cooperation Bill. Before we take the oral evidence, members, I'd just like to refer members to correspondence from the Minister for Health, Social Services and Public Safety. Again, this is in tabled papers and it is page number 10. The Minister advising that he is generally supportive of the intention and desire to see greater cooperation and collaboration. However, he does ask if the introduction of a statutory duty is necessary. The Minister indicates he will be seeking substantial amendments to Clause 4 of this bill, and he states his officials are working with OFMDFM officials to address any drafting concerns. So the question, members, is are you content to copy the correspondence from the Minister for Health to the officials in OFMDFM and also to Mr Agnew? And that would allow them to respond during the final evidence sessions next Monday. And are you also content to copy to the Health Committee for their information? Yeah. Okay, thank you. So we have no fewer than four evidence sessions today based on the themes identified at our meeting on the 25th of March. And to begin with, we're going to hear from representatives of children with disabilities or organisations that work with children with disabilities. The clerk's brief for this starts at page 47, and also available in your packs are the written submissions from the College of Occupational Therapists, that's page 50, the Royal National Institute of Blind People, page 55, Parents of Children with Acquired Brain Injury is page 59, Disability Action is page 66, and a copy of the bill, the EFM and technical briefing is at page 80, and finally in table papers at page 14 is an additional paper from the RNIB, which I think only came through yesterday, so I must apologise. I, for one, have not had the opportunity to get to that. So, with us in this first session, Maria Tracy, who's a parent of a child with acquired brain injury. Sandra Allen represents the College of Occupational Therapists. She is the lead in terms of service delivery for children's occupational therapy. And Rosaline Dempsey is from the RNIB, and she manages children and youth services. And Rosaline, I believe you have a visual impairment, and if I'm correct, you would like each member to clearly name themselves at the start of their questions.
Yes, please.
Okay. And for the sake of clarity, I'm Mike Nesbitt, currently speaking as chair. So, I understand it's, for some of you, it's your first time in front of the committee, so I thank you for joining us. Please try and relax. This is, we serve you, not the other way around. And we're very pleased that you're engaging with us. We thank you for your written submissions, and we now look forward to hearing from you. I think one of the consistent issues raised by stakeholders in this process has been the potential benefit of this for children and young people with additional health and or educational needs. So we're very keen to hear your views, and could I ask you in order maybe to make short opening statements. Maria, would you care to go first?
I'm Maria Tracy, and I want to thank OFMDFM for giving me the opportunity to speak here today. Acquired brain injury is very much unknown and therefore misunderstood. And children's services to date, from my experience and from the parents that I have been in company with, is lacking. And we feel that this bill has the potential of changing that.
Okay. Sandra?
Thank you very much, Chair, and I would like to thank you for inviting the College of Occupational Therapists to give evidence today. The key focus of the college, the key message we would have is cooperation from the bill. Within occupational therapy services in Northern Ireland, we actually have a very real and effective example of how the suggested level of cooperation can work on a day-to-day clinical level. I'm referring to the rollout of the housing toolkit, cross-departmental development that has benefited clinicians and service users, as well as delivering more equity in provision. The college wants to see the same level of cooperation replicated within this children's services. There are 4 specific areas the college believes must be addressed. Firstly, strategic workforce planning at the level of service delivery. From our perspective, there are significant gaps in the area of neonatal care, early years intervention, learning disability and the justice services. Occupational therapy provision within education is one example where the impact of this lack of planning is very evident. In this context, occupational therapy has been provided on the basis of long-standing goodwill arrangements very often, which has resulted in fluctuations in availability of therapy and accommodation within schools. Special schools, where I understand there's no cap on pupil numbers, is a particular concern for occupational therapists who are expected to meet the growing demand, and this needs to change. Secondly, our experience indicates times of transition creates anxiety and in many cases crisis in lives of families that we work with. They experience significant changes in professional personnel, service systems and support, all of which leads to greater uncertainty for the child and their family. Thirdly, integrated service level agreements. In particular, we look to the present arrangements in place for the management of equipment. The lack of integrated planning and provision results in a costly resource being inefficiently used. The lack of such agreements also affect children's transport arrangements, where unclear accountability creates confusion and anxiety for service users, families and schools. The last point is in relation to demographic changes in Northern Ireland. More children with complex needs are surviving, which is a very positive outcome. They will, however, need lifetime of services, and this seriously needs to be factored in at many levels. And to end, just the college wants this bill to result in government departments cooperating so they effectively deliver well-coordinated children's services. These services must be monitored and give clear lines of responsibility. They must focus on the child and caregivers and their needs rather than departmental boundaries and budgets. And we want cooperation for all children's care from the prenatal stage to transition, and departments working in an integrated way with the child and their caregivers at the centre.
Sandra, thank you very much. And Rosaline.
Thank you. First of all, my apologies that our paper was slightly later, but I will refer to it in my presentation, and also it will be available, I think, for the committee members as well. So we do appreciate the OFMDFM committee inviting us to speak about the bill, and we're very pleased to be giving evidence today. Just a little background about RNIB. RNIB Northern Ireland works to support children and adults with sight loss to enable them to lead full and independent lives. We have 72 staff and 272 volunteers supporting our work. The estimated total of blind and partially sighted children aged 0 to 18 in Northern Ireland is 1,708. That's from the Northern Ireland Census. RNIB currently supports 800 of those children and young people and their families across Northern Ireland through family support, transition services and youth services. Our vision is that children and young people will have the same rights, responsibilities and opportunities as their sighted peers. Looking at the clauses as well, RNIB concurs that integrated working in relation to the development of the children's services in Northern Ireland is paramount to ensuring effectiveness in practice and better outcomes. While many services are doing great work with children, sometimes they're not working in an interconnected way. I did speak to a parent who gave me a case study on this. She is a parent of a child with sight loss and complex additional needs. And her words were, "I feel that it is my job as a parent to keep each of these professionals and services informed about what the other is doing, as on the whole, these services are not connected in a way in which they can easily pass information to each other." I think we would all agree that it should not really be the role of parents to fill in the blanks when services don't work in a joined up way. The RNIB Northern Ireland Looking Ahead booklet is an example of when services have worked very well together. The booklet was funded by the Children and Young People Strategic Partnership and the Northern Outcomes Group, and we brought together statutory and voluntary agencies to contribute to the booklet, and parents have expressed their happiness, I suppose, that they have something that will give them more of an idea of how they can navigate the services for their children. We support Clause 1 of the bill in relation to the cooperation between government departments and the duty there. And we would add that it would be very good if they would also work with voluntary agencies as well, and also that we would welcome a standard referral process for families, even within the different departments, so in health and in education, that it would be an easier system to navigate for parents and families whenever they're trying to get services for their child. While it's fundamental that government departments work together to further achieve the high-level outcomes from the children's strategy, we would also express the importance of each department working with the voluntary organisations as well in the light of our services. The implementation of the bill should enhance the work of the Children and Young People Strategic Partnership and encourage other departments to become involved. For example, for young people, the Department of Employment and Learning. On Clause 3 then, on the economic climate, RNIB supports the pooling of resources in times of economic austerity, but we do express concern at the cuts to statutory and voluntary services for children and young people with sight loss. We stress the need to protect existing services and also the importance of early intervention for children and young people and their families. There is research evidence that would indicate the relationship between disability and poverty from Queen's University in 2014. RNIB feels that it's critical for departments to collect data on sight loss and other disabilities in order to plan services. We note that there's currently no data collected on premature babies, and we feel that this would be very useful as it carries the risks of sight loss and other disabilities. We would also note that registration and certification of sight loss is a voluntary process, and sometimes on several occasions it has not always been communicated to parents how useful that can be in terms of getting support and vital services for their children. We have some research from RNIB from 2015 that was carried out in England to reflect some of this. Clauses 4 and 5 around amending the Children's Order, we support those to reflect the clauses within the bill. We would propose that there would be a working group established to implement the Children's Cooperation Bill, and we would be keen to be involved with this. We think that voluntary and community organisations have a significant role to play here because we are used to outcomes-based accountability, and we are very used to as well being flexible and delivering services in times of austerity and change. To conclude, RNIB once again thanks OFMDFM for inviting us to give evidence today. We know the will exists to continually build and improve on services for children with sight loss and other disabilities and their families. We should bear in mind wider legislation such as the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child and the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities for better cooperation in future services. Our children have a right to the best services available and that we can give them, and this can only be done through multidisciplinary working Children with sight loss and their families can face social exclusion and isolation, leading to an adverse effect on their mental health and confidence levels. If statutory and voluntary services can work together to intervene at the earliest stages, we can support these children and families and avoid the economic and, more importantly, the human costs of not realising their potential. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Some general points, and one of which I think Sandra raised, which is this idea of the difficulty of transition points for young people who have additional needs, going from primary to secondary education, secondary to tertiary, out of education into employment or whatever. Does this bill ease those difficulties, in your view, Sandra?
Well, I think it could. I think definitely collaboration. At the minute, there is a big problem even within the health service, because there are children's services and adult services, so the whole professional teams will change, the whole element of the way the service is. Yes, occupational therapists contribute to the smooth transition of children. We are there and help support with special education need. The trigger points. Transition is a key time for children and their families, and it is a very stressful time, and they're not sure just what route.
So what is the potential of the bill?
I think possibly it would encourage working with education, say from the child moving into school in the first place from home. We would be working together, and this bill would encourage collaboration to work with education to get them into school, because occupational therapy, we do access studies into schools if a school needs any adaptations completed before a child with physical disabilities would go in. So we could build that in, and that could encourage, and also from primary to post-primary, it would be the same. The occupational therapist would liaise with the secondary school, and if there was statutory obligation to support that, it would mean it would be smoother.
This, by the way, is a question for all three. Please feel, and any of you feel free to join in. As Sandra says, the bill's about encouraging collaboration to the point of making it a statutory duty. However, there is no sanction for any individual or department or agency that does not comply with
Exactly,
the bill.
yeah. For children with acquired brain injury, in 2008 and 2010, we had the RABIG strategy. It was a missed opportunity. That strategy had relied on the importance of the cohesiveness of the Department of Education working with health, but it wasn't reciprocated. Well, from a parent's perspective, it hasn't been fulfilled. It did come out of it a very good multidisciplinary team, and it's the Children's Acquired Brain Injury Consultation Service. That team, fortunately, is surviving on very little funding coming from the strategy. However, it's being oversubscribed with requests from the Department of Education. The Department of Education required, but they don't fund it. We feel that there has been a missed opportunity, and the RQIA have taken this opportunity this year to review, has the strategy been implemented? At the meeting that I attended, listening to parents from all trusts in Northern Ireland, it was so obvious that parents and children have been let down, that there is no pathway. Children from 0 to 23 their needs are not being met. We have to wait the report. Will that report make changes? I don't know what power they have. So for my child, I can't allow governments to make strategies that aren't enforced. They're not reciprocating the need to work with each other. They say they will. I can give you examples. But what I'm hoping is that this bill will ensure that departments are not only pooling resources financially, but that model that we have at the moment in Northern Ireland, the Children's Acquired Brain Injury Consultation Service team, is made up of 3 members, all from the health department. there's a clinical psychologist, an OT and a speech therapist. But when I visited England and in Cambridge, the same team is set up and they have a paraprotective teacher. That makes so much sense when you're doing statement and on transitioning, that education is practically linked. And I would like to remind the department that we don't have a rehabilitation centre here for children in Northern Ireland. We have 5 adults, we have no children. I'm not going to question is that in par with England or anywhere else, I'm just saying that's the problem at the moment. And what we really, really need to look at, how can we make school the centre for these children, where they get their rehabilitation. Children with acquired brain injury are all not severely left disabled. The Child Brain Injury Trust has been a fabulous charity and has given the parents that I know a lot of support. And they would have numbers of children, up to maybe 75% of them, return to a mainstream setting. But what we found as parents, we came to Stormont back in November 2013 and we spoke to Mr. O'Dowd. Mr. O'Dowd was only aware of 24 children in the whole of Northern Ireland with acquired brain injury. And it was just unthinkable. How does the Department of Health have so many large numbers of children with acquired brain injury and the Department of Education not know that they exist? And it has transpired that they have different coding systems that aren't linked, and how the Department of Education has a SEND process doesn't identify all children with acquired brain injury. What was even more worrying for the parents was to find out we don't train our teachers with acquired brain injury. So as parents, we've had to challenge the Department of Education to find out that on a syllabus for teachers, they have no neurodevelopment training before they become teachers or in service. And there we are at a point then, who do we go next to? Do we go to Dale and ask them to change the syllabus for teachers? And there's 4 colleges, and them 4 colleges do not include the same element of brain development or brain impairment on their syllabus to teachers. So what the role of a parent has become is knocking on the door of Department of Health, Department of Education, Department of Dale, Department of Justice. Unfortunately, the actual condition is misunderstood because it is not the incidence and prevalence isn't recorded properly. So we don't have a fair idea of how many numbers there are out there. But what we also don't have, we don't have enough public awareness. Educational psychologists and teachers would not be able to identify a child with acquired brain injury. And again, when we talk about the school system, we're talking about the age of 6 to 16 dependent. So there's no early intervention. And for those who may not know, acquired brain injury includes traumatic brain injury and all other forms of injury. The child who has the cancer diagnosis, who gets the chemo, the child who has swine flu, the child who has been electrically shocked, the child who has hypoxia during his life. So the definition is misunderstood, the numbers are misunderstood, the support's not out there, and they're not working together. We have one model at the moment, and it is a multidisciplinary team in Northern Ireland that is all health professionals, and I'm asking that this bill would ensure that we would at least have on that team interdepartmental staff with expertise together.
I mean, that's a very powerful argument. Thank you for greater cooperation. Can I say, first of all, I accept what you're saying, that we tend to approach this through a purely medical model, and you're arguing for a more social and holistic model. But to come back to the question, the parents that you know and that you work with and that you share with, presuming that, like you, they see the potential for this bill, the fact that there is no sanction for any individual or agency or department that does not fulfil the statutory duty placed upon it, what impact is that having on those parents?
Unfortunately, you're speaking of the parents that know their children has an acquired brain injury. There's a large population out there of parents who don't even know their children. They've been undiagnosed or misdiagnosed.
Sorry, just to be specific, if this goes into law as
Yeah.
it's currently drafted,
Yeah.
there is no sanction if a department, say the Department of Health and the Department of Education, do not get their act together so they can share information. There's no sanction.
Yeah, our children's potential will not be met.
But should there be a sanction? Should there be something in the bill that says if you do not cooperate, there will be repercussions for your department?
Well, softly go easy attitude hasn't worked in the past. We have to wait on the RQIA report, but if it hasn't worked in the past, so obviously we do need a robust mechanism in place that calls these people to account. Plus the advantage, I know it's moving to sideways, children who have an acquired brain injury may actually incur that injury at an early stage of their life and it's not identified at the time. That deficit will show up later in that child's life, way past school age. So they may end up having behaviours that unfortunately gain them a criminal record. So the social aspect, yes, I have pointed out the social aspect of this bill, but why we look at the moment for social is the inclusion. The medical model at the moment may not work because brain injury is permanent. And it's a very negative place, and that's where we're sitting at the moment. And parents of children with acquired brain injury would like us to move to where we're in par with all children, and that there is a robust mechanism to ensure that all their potentials is met and not overlooked, and it's not petty, and that we do share resources.
One other issue before I open it up to members, not looking for a long answer necessarily here. This legislation is going to use the definition of young people that the Commissioner for Young People uses from the 2003 order. In other words, people who are under 18 or under 21 in young people in care or disability. Is anybody not content with that?
Fine. Currently, at the minute,
You're fine with that, yeah? Rosaline, you fine?
Yes,
Yeah,
we're
okay.
fine with
And
that.
Maria, you're fine
Yeah,
with that?
definitely,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, Alex Maskey.
Thank you, Chair. Alec Maskey. Thank you for all the presentations so far. It's been very compelling, I have to say. I think for me, I would like to separate it a wee bit because I think everybody around the table, all the parties, made it very clear they were very supportive of the general principles of this bill. So it's our job to try to tease out how it can be most effective, really, at the end of the day. I know the Chair just mentioned about the notion of sanctions maybe not been in the bill and so on, but there's other elements of it which would be on the record. The parties around here have been questioning around how do we make the bill. If we're all supportive of the bill and its intentions and the potential, how do we turn the potential into a reality and more effectiveness? And that's what we've obviously got to tease out. So we are looking clearly at maybe some amendments to the bill or different clauses or whatever around the clear purpose of it and the outcomes. What outcomes are we actually expecting? Because some of what you said are quite clearly, Maria, your last contribution are quite clearly, you show the need for the joined upness.
Yeah.
Elements of what you've just said really means that some individual departments need to do their work perhaps differently or better than what they maybe currently are now, and you've, in fairness to yourself, said you'll wait on the EQIA report. But I was interested in the point that Rosaline had made early on around a working group, because if you have the strategic partnership in place and then if you have the bill put in place, why do we need to have an additional working group? Obviously you put that as a proposal.
Yeah,
So
I think it's really just to show the to share expertise between the statutory and the voluntary sector, specifically at the design phase of the bill, not necessarily an ongoing thing throughout, but even just at the beginning stages to pull in any areas of expertise. If you're saying about how we can put the bill into place and make sure that the departments are working together to share resources, we in the voluntary sector have we have a lot of experience in that area that we could bring to bear in a group like that, but I would see it probably more as a shorter term thing than a long term. Perhaps I wasn't as clear on that in the evidence.
okay, no, thank you. No, that's clear. Okay, thank you.
David McAveen.
Thank you very much, Chair, and for the record, I'm David McElveen. I actually agree with my colleague here entirely. I mean, as far as the objectives of this bill are concerned, we're entirely supportive of where we want to get to with this. And certainly, sponsor of the bill, we've made him aware of that. The problem, though, that we have as legislators is that there is a very, very fine line between a good piece of legislation and a bad piece of legislation. And I think this bill, as it has been originally drafted, if this was the end result, I think personally we probably would be on the right side of a good piece of legislation. However, we don't live in a perfect world. And I suspect, and I don't want to be the prophet of doom, but I suspect that some departments will look at this first draft and have some concerns about how they can practically implement some of the things that are being impressed upon. And I think it will only be a matter of time before there will be an amendment that has Department of Justice clearly at its source, or the Department of Health, or the Department of Education. And we very well could find ourselves in a position 6 months down the line, and I'm conscious we have some friends from the Law Centre and they may want to pick up on some of these points as well, but I suspect we could be 6 months down the line and we have a bill that has been diluted beyond recognition. And if it is then the final bill that gets through the Assembly, then we have done you a very great disservice in that we have implemented a bad piece of legislation which has actually caused more confusion than brought clarity to the issue. So I suppose what I'd like to ask in that context, you as obviously as an interested group who know the sector inside out, who know what the needs are, what could be achieved outside of the legislative route that would bring about the same outcomes? And what I'm trying to maybe get at is, is guidelines something that would be a consideration? Because if the department was to issue guidelines which compels other departments to work together, this is the mode of practice that needs to be used in order to deliver the outcomes that our families of children and young people are expecting, then that circumvents the legislative route and takes away the risk of something disastrous happening. And as I say, I don't want to sound like I'm kind of writing this bill off before it's even come to its final stages, but I suppose all of us around the table here in the legislative side have been doing this now long enough to kind of know how this all plays out. And my concerns would be that we find a bill that is ultimately going to make your aspirations, completely dispelled. And I think that would be a travesty. It would be a hugely missed opportunity, and one that I think must be avoided at all possible costs. So how do you, how would you respond to that? How would you feel if you were given the choice between a bad piece of legislation and improved guidelines? What would your choice ultimately be if it came down to sort of that thin edge of the wedge?
Certainly guidelines have their place, and there are examples of where they work. Within the education system there is the statementing process, which is a legislative process, and the health service, allied health professions and nurses feed into that. There are guidelines that we follow to feed into that. Now, there were no resources came with that. That is additional work for us. But the system works. It's just not been backfilled with funding and resources to accommodate it. But certainly examples do work, or guidelines do work. It's just the way they would be implemented.
The Children and Young People Strategic Partnership is an example where agencies were cooperating well with each other, but it was based on goodwill. If those guidelines worked or had been working, children with acquired brain injury, their parents would be saying that we feel that our children's needs are being met, but we're here today saying they're not being met. There's something terribly wrong. Yes, there's been education reforms, there's now this bill, but there has to be an overarching opportunity to manage this in a way that it's implemented at the most effective and efficient use of resources. Unfortunately, I'm hearing that service users are saying that our service providers are cooperating. That does not materialise. You only have to go through the legislative statement process, and it is medical advice with educational advice. It doesn't come shared. And recently I was told, if you get both literacy support from education and you get speech therapy from your local health child development clinic, your child's over-resourced. And it seems to be that it is what they're trying to do, not meet the child's needs, but run away from responsibility. So, for me, the experience that I'm experiencing, it's not working. On paper, theoretically, they are. I don't know what guidelines and who would articulate them guidelines. How would they be implemented any better than this bill? But if you can get guidelines and we don't have to wait for this bill, please go for it. I would be all, that would be resolve some of the issues that I have today.
I certainly agree with Maria. There are times that they don't work too.
Unfortunately.
Okay. Bronwyn. So, Rosaline, did you want to comment?
Oh, sorry, just to agree with what was said, and also just to point out that I think there are guidelines in place and it hasn't necessarily led to multidisciplinary working at all levels. So, for example, in the case study I referred to, a parent was talking about her teacher of the visually impaired who wasn't invited to the child development clinic meeting about her child, whereas in England and other parts of the UK that would be a standard good practice model and would often happen. So my question is, I suppose, why, with our guidelines that we have about working together, why that isn't happening right now. So I would support it if there was a strengthening of guidelines. That would be something that could help the process, possibly.
I think it's a really important question, and I think one we need to get an answer to as well. If there are guidelines or why they haven't been working, and that's maybe further work we'll work on.
Absolutely. Thank you. Bronwyn.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your presentation. My name's Bronwyn McGahan. I'm not sure if you're aware of the current inquiry being undertaken by the Employment and Learning Committee into the provision for special educational needs. That's been going on for the past several months. We've done extensive engagements with parents, and some of the issues that are being flagged up we're well aware of. In terms of transition processes, for example, I don't believe that this bill will sort out the problem. That when, even if you had a smooth and excellent transition process, the bottom line is there's nowhere for these kids to go. And as a representative of Fermanagh South Tyrone, this is an issue that we're continuously experiencing. We do need more provision at FE colleges. For example, we engaged with a parent whose child was severely autistic, and she was learning to tell, and it wasn't appropriate for her. So that's something that we are currently looking into. Transport is an issue as well in rural areas. For example, again, an autistic child who gets transport to the FE college, she needs to be met by someone to take her to the classroom. That doesn't exist either, which means then a parent has to drive 10, 15 miles to the local college. There's also I've also been involved in, for example, meetings locally with health, and the issues that would be continuously raised by parents is education, and their response is, we don't have a statutory duty to deal with education. That's what you're dealing with. In terms of, you mentioned, I think this is a very important point, regarding the lack of information. There's no information recorded regarding the number of kids with disabilities and the type of disabilities. This is something that we're looking at in terms of it should be maybe a legislative requirement. Mm-hmm. And when you have that information there, then that will have to be resourced, or resources will have to be pulled in the right direction. Can I ask that you make a submission to that inquiry? Because I find some of your stuff very useful.
I would have liked to have, but when I found out about it, already closed. But we would be willing, and we had wrote to the Department of Education saying that we will offer ourselves to Francis Curran, that we would support any in any way that we could. There is a new audit of acquired brain injury and educational psychology to take place this year, and we have offered to input into that. But if you look at the to do with the Department of Education, to do with the reforms, brain injury does not feature at the moment in a specific with one specific charity representing them.
Right, okay. Like I said, I think your presentations are very useful, and I think it's a pity that our committee hasn't had sight of those, because it definitely would help to feed into formulating recommendations. And it's something I'll raise with the chair of the committee, Robin Swan, because I think some of this stuff is very, very important.
But I think, Bronwyn, if you're agreeable, is once we have the transcript from Hansard, we'll send it on to Robin and the Dell Committee for their attention, because I think we all agree that you're right in that point. Okay, Jimmy?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. Jimmy Spratt's my name. In terms of bureaucratic process, and probably as Sandra, in terms of reporting processes, I mean, there is a danger of creating another level of a reporting process, which I assume that all of us around the table, one of the outcomes that we want to see is delivery that will really impact on the lives of children and young people, as opposed to creating another bureaucratic nightmare and creating a nightmare where we have lawyers, fat cat lawyers, regularly at the courts for judicial reviews on this, that and the other thing. I mean, that's taking money away, let's face it.
Absolutely.
And where the money is actually needed, in terms of whether it's equipment or adaptations to the work that you do, in terms of what is needed for various disabilities. Now, in terms of pooling resources, and it's a very simple thing to say, but you're a practitioner. I mean, how do you pool resources from various departments and at the same time ensure accountability and ensure that you're not having to sit at a desk for an extra X number of hours writing reports that go to some other desk, like a chessboard, pass from desk to desk, because that's what there is a danger of creating, or creating another quango of people that really, at the end of the day, the outcome is not for the people, the important people, the children and the young people who require the outcome. So how do we get around that? How do we as legislators make sure that that nightmare is not foisted on you folk at the end of the day, in terms of being the people who are delivering?
Well, that is a very valid point that you make. In the example of equipment to special schools, the occupational therapist will assess and make the recommendation. However, it's special education, the education or the school itself who will purchase the equipment. It's then the responsibility of, because they own the equipment, the maintenance and the upkeep and the recycling, infection control and everything else is the responsibility of education. And that has caused a lot of difficulties. I mean, it does mean that the equipment is not recycled the way it should be, so that's inefficiency from a financial point of view. So if there was some way that that could be brought into this, one thought that we possibly had was something like a children's department that would be overarching a number of government departments, you know, education and health. And
Trying to reduce departments, but no members.
but it would have, they would be accountable and answerable, and that I don't know if services would be.
We don't want to create more jobs just for the sake of, and because that money to pay for all of that.
Yeah. Well, there's
it's not getting to the source. It's not getting to the area that it needs to go to. So I'm just interested to hear how you feel. I mean, I think most of us around the table agree that money could be much better spent, and it could be much better spent if it was being spent from the centre in relation to somebody with disability or somebody who requires it in terms of through the educational process or whatever. But it's a case of each department have their own resources, and it's how those resources. There needs to be accountability in all of this, because we all know what has happened in the past in terms of accountability. Money from the public purse, we must be accountable for it.
I think at the minute another issue would be the number of therapy hours that go into schools, and that without any statutory obligation, that is a variable feast where the demand is.
So you would be opposed to creating another level of bureaucracy, but you are very clearly saying, let's get the resources into the coal face where it's needed.
Coal face is where the resources are, and very definitely needed.
Folks, thank you very much indeed to all of you. I think we are aware that all governments, not just the executive here, traditionally work vertically in silos of health, education, social development, and you only really make an impact in people's lives if you can come through horizontally and get people working together. So your testimony has struck hope, and I thank you for it, and it will impact on our thinking as we move this bill forward.
Can I just add on that, with our housing toolkit that I referred to initially, that was with DSD and Department of Health, and within that it was an appointment. Paul O'Brien is the man's name, but he has an OT background and training, and his post is jointly funded from the DSD and the Department of Health, and he was there to kind of channel that through. Just as.
Okay. Sandra, thank you very much. Rosaline and Maria.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. So members, for our second briefing, again, plenty of papers in your packs. The clerk's brief is at page 99. And then we have written submissions as follows. Cine Children Northern Ireland, page 103. NICFA, the Council for Voluntary Action, page 110. NSPCC, page 112. Playboard NI, 117. Employers for Childcare, page 124. Include Youth is at 126. Save the Children, 133. And VOIPIC, the Voice of Young People in Care, is at page 141. So I invite to the table Ellen Finlay from Children in Northern Ireland. Ellen is Policy Officer. Colin Reid is Policy Officer and Public Affairs Manager for the NSPCC. Lisa Heron, Michael Heron, beg your pardon, Lisa Michael Heron is Policy Manager for the Council for Voluntary Action. And Alan Heron is the Director of Service Delivery and Development for Playboard NI. And Ellen, I begin with thanks to you for pulling this panel together for us. We have your written submissions, so I don't want to deny you the opportunity to make short opening comments, but I will ask you to be 2 minutes tops, and I'll put the clock on it. So, Ellen.
Yep. Thank you, Chair, for inviting us today. I'd like to place on record Children in Northern Ireland's support for the Children's Bill. In addition to our written evidence, I'm just going to make a few additional points before handing over to my colleagues, who will provide you with examples as to why we need the Children's Bill. Firstly, we believe the Children's Bill should be viewed in three parts. Firstly, to place the children's strategy at the heart of government. Secondly, to ensure a delivery mechanism for achieving the outcomes of the children's strategy. So that would be the doing part, which is the cooperation and pulling budgets. And thirdly, monitoring transparency and accountability, and that's the reporting part. We have three things we'd like to suggest in order to improve the bill further. The first is at the start of the bill to have a clear narrative as to the outline of the essence of the bill, and also to break down what's needed just at departmental level but also at agency level. We also think there needs to be guidance notes and a memorandum of understanding for both departments and agencies so that everybody knows what their statutory obligations are and how to carry those out. And finally, we would like to see a yearly reporting cycle. We would actually go further in terms of the yearly reporting cycle. We think that it should be laid and debated by the Assembly so that we can understand what is happening in terms of the outcomes. We believe that this is needed to ensure accountability and transparency. So if I can ask my colleague,
Thank you.
Colin.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. And I'll be 2 minutes. NSPC are very supportive of this bill. It takes a fairly light touch to addressing a gap in relation to cooperation and coordination between government departments. Clause 4 develops the Children's Services planning arrangements, modernises the regulations in a system that's well embedded already. Importantly, it should not, in our view, cost anything significant for government departments or organisations to implement, and should actually make for better and more cost-effective policy making. Government policy making for children is very important. It often sets the strategic context for operational delivery for us all. An observation the NSPCC has is that it can become more difficult the more government departments are involved in policy making to make progress. Illustrative areas, for example, a big one and a little one that we have found difficult to progress is around internet safety, impacts all our children. Small areas, female genital mutilation, a problem that's been identified in other parts of the UK and probably a small problem here, but nonetheless needs a very, very coordinated approach across a range of government departments. And that's not to say that work has not been done in both those areas by government departments, quite the opposite, but coordination and leadership perhaps could be better at times. We have 2 suggestions in relation to the Clause 1. Ellen has mentioned about some sort of statutory guidance, and we would echo that, to ensure that government departments don't just do what they've been doing already, and there's some structure to how we do that. We'd also like to see some creation of an NGO or forum where agencies can have a discussion with government departments. One was formed in the early years of the children's strategy. We found it a very useful and beneficial body for us all to look at action plans and to debate issues with government, and certainly that might help very well. We hope that this legislation will make a difference to policy development for children.
Thank you. Lisa.
Hi. Obviously, NICFA isn't a children's organisation, so I'm going to take a slightly different perspective, I suppose, than my colleagues on this, and maybe present it from a wider view of why we support this bill and the potential that we see in it. You'll all know that NICFA has been doing a lot of work on public sector spending, on budget cuts and its implications for voluntary and community sector organisations, but also for the people and the communities and the families that they work with. At the end of last year, for our sins, we had 170 people from the voluntary and community sector met with about 80 officials to discuss this year's budget, the 2015-2016 budget. And the key learning from them and our subsequent analysis of spending plans and cuts plans, there's 3 things I wanted to share with you that I think there's lots of learning, but there's 3 things that I think are particularly relevant to what we're talking about today. The first one is that there's very little sense across departments of the cumulative impact of the cuts that are happening. Very little attention is being paid to the cuts that are being made in terms of the impact of the services that are being lost, the impacts of the people that are being adversely impacted, so the types of people that are being adversely impacted, and the impact on the programme for government targets in terms of cutting things now that we're actually going to need to help us deliver our PFG targets now and in the future. And the third thing, and probably the most worrying, is that early intervention and prevention work seems to be being hit the hardest, because that tends to be the kind of work that's delivered by the voluntary and community sector. And we heard from ORNIB and other colleagues earlier about the importance of early intervention and prevention work. Separately from that, we have NICFA's carried out a Cuts Watch survey, and we have organised detailed information from only 77 organisations that have faced cuts recently, so these cuts that have already happened. And that very small sample, so just 77, have given us information on more than £5 million worth of cuts. And what's relevant to your discussion today is that the overwhelming majority of those are organisations that are delivering services to children and young people. So those are the services that are being impacted.
That's 2 minutes, Lisa.
Okay, I'll just finish by saying it's very clear to us that in a situation of tough and constrained public finances, a bill like this is really desirable because, for 2 very practical reasons, it encourages better use of scarce resources, and it will provide that overview that we think is missing so far in the services that are being cut for children and young people.
Okay, thank you. Alan.
Okay, first off, thank you, Committee, for the opportunity to come along today. We are supportive of the bill, as are our colleagues. Play, as you'll know, is central to the lives of children, providing development opportunities across a range of areas from health, education, skills and learning. But from a policy perspective, the planning and decision-making processes that impact on play span right across all government departments, really. And for us, that is the reason why this is such a critical bill. With regards to the duty to cooperate, I really just want to give a couple of small examples, really, of where we feel the bill could have supported enhanced delivery of services. I'm sure we would all agree that cooperation should be at the cornerstone of planning and delivery of children's services. However, in our view and in our experience, cooperation between departments can often appear to happen almost by accident rather than design. It's dependent on external factors and relationships. And one recent example I can give you relates to the play and leisure strand of delivering social change. In January's monitoring round, an allocation was made by OFMDFM to the Environment Agency to develop natural play within Crawfordsburn. And in this case, the connection between departments came about not as a result of direct cooperation aimed at delivering an implementation plan. It really came as an offshoot of engagements we as an organisation had with DOE, which led us to make a connection between the two departments, resulting in support for the initiative, meeting both play and leisure and wider departmental objectives. A further example we feel historically of where the duty to cooperate would have been very beneficial relates to the play and leisure implementation plan. As you'll be aware, it was signed off by the Executive in 2011 after quite an intensive period of cross-sectoral and cross-departmental cooperation. Our assessment of the actual impact shows that the implementation has fallen significantly short, due in part to a lack of subsequent cooperation at the delivery stage between departments and agencies. We do feel that a duty to cooperate would have supported and enhanced the situation. It is our view that placing cooperation on a statutory footing would ensure that effective relationships are developed and maintained in the interest of outcomes for children, as opposed to being led by external factors, relationships and at times chance.
That's 2 minutes, Alan, if you're...
Okay, so yeah, in closing then, just two areas really. We would strongly endorse the adoption of an outcomes-based focus across government, which would help to ensure that departments collectively contributed to overarching outcomes as opposed to individual departmental objectives. And further, with regards to the reporting, we would strongly advocate the review of impact arising from cooperation on an annual basis, leading to a 3-year, more comprehensive report against the outcomes.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Ellen, you talked about a clear narrative being absent at the moment from this bill.
Yes.
Articulate a clear narrative for me, please.
I guess what I was thinking about was just the essence of the bill in terms of it's about cooperation, it's about delivering on the children's strategy and it's about delivering on outcomes. The other aspect was the guidance and the memorandum of understanding. I think there still needs to be a lot of discussion with departments as to how that could be implemented.
Yeah, this seems to be a common theme coming back to us from submissions that you're looking for sort of statutory guidance to be issued. What's the rationale behind that?
I think probably because at the moment we're relying on goodwill within departments and agencies, and if there's a statutory guidance, then people will do what they're supposed to do because it's in statute.
Colin, did I mishear you, or did you say you would like to see some sort of new body, NGO or whatever, coming together to help coordinate?
And we're not talking about creating a whole lot of new structures and stuff, but in terms of the implementation of these requirements of this bill, it would be helpful to have some dialogue between the NGO sector and government in terms of children's policy development. It has existed in the past in the previous children's strategy and the children's unit at OFMDFM. We found that a very beneficial thing, and I think officials did as well, to share experiences, talk through issues, try and take forward the debate, and we would like to see something like that in this bill as well.
Well, what about, first of all, what about the Commissioner for Children and Young People, who has that statutory duty to review services?
Yeah, and I think she plays an important role, and I'd echo David's point in terms of governance. No doubt the Children's Commissioner will play an important role in benchmarking and overseeing and holding government departments to account. But we're talking about service delivery of a range of both services and policy that various children's organisations have, and the need to have a regular dialogue with government.
And what about the Children and Young People Strategic Partnership? Does it not perform that sort of function?
Yeah, it does at that level. I think you have to see that the children's partnership is at an operational level, which is different to a strategic and policy level within government. And I mean, that's reflected in the legislation as well. I mean, we think those arrangements work well, and we do have those dialogues. I think the challenge is to ensure it happens at a governmental level in a more effective way.
Chair, can I just ask a quick supplementary on that? How would that compare to the like of the NEETS forum, for example? Would that be a similar type of forum?
I guess so. You've got departments, you've got organisations, and you've got agencies. So yes, I think that could work.
Jim Spratt.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the presentation to all of you. Colin, in terms of, you made a couple of statements at the start, so with statements come some clarity, or looking for some clarity. You said this was a light touch in legislation. What's a light touch in legislation? I mean, that sounds a pretty funny statement to me in terms of, is it just scraping over the top of things? Is it, or has it not been written properly and it's not all that enforceable? You know, it's a statement you made, so I'm looking for clarity on that.
Okay.
And then you said it had no cost of significance, no significant cost. So can you tell the committee now on evidence what costings you have done as an organisation that allows you to make such a statement?
Okay, well, in terms of the first one, there are various ways in which I assume you could write legislation. You've had a discussion already previously with the the people who have given evidence. You could create duties and offences, etc., etc. I think they're looking at other experiences, and let me give an example of public protection arrangements in Northern Ireland who have similar facilitative legislation that creates a framework for cooperation. It doesn't have any sanctions for failing to cooperate, but that has facilitated agencies in Northern Ireland, some of which are government departments, have very, very good arrangements and to work very collectively together without any form of sanction. Rather than create huge duties on government departments, what this bill does, in our view, is potentially facilitate better joined-up policy making without causing a whole structure of governance and accountability, and that could facilitate the broad direction of travel that we need to go in.
But is there not a danger in that type of law? And you heard me earlier referring to the fat cat lawyers. Is there not a danger in creating a situation where you're continually judicial review or legal processes, which is taking money away from, I assume you want to get the money to you?
I don't think we would see that this bill would do
you
that.
Would see, but is there not a danger in that happening if the legislation is not watertight enough?
Well, we would hope that the legislation would facilitate and enable good practice and develop what needs to take place without creating legal challenges and things.
I assume that you would accept that if you go into continual legal processes, judicial reviews or anything like that, that you're creating a situation where money is being taken out of the system, because there's only one pot of money and it's been taken out of the system to pay for something, and it's not getting to the cold face of the children and young people that we wanted to get to. I assume that's the outcome that all of us collectively in this room.
We wouldn't want to see that either, but we don't think that this legislation as written would do that. I think it would facilitate better policy, more joined up policy making at government level.
Is there not a danger if it's a light touch that could happen?
No, I don't think so. I think our experience with other types of legislation that facilitate.
I'm not saying, I have to say that what you've said to me, that doesn't convince me.
I can only say, based on our experience of dealing with other types of legislation that are like this, if it facilitates better policy making, better operation, that's a good thing. Our experience is not that there are judicial reviews and things. So, I mean, you asked me about finance. I mean, no, I haven't costed this out. Based on our experience of arrangements. I mean,
how can you make a statement then and say that there's no significant cost?
Because the Children's Services
no significant cost to the thing. You know, that's a statement that you have made in evidence to the committee, and we're trying to put something through that I suspect all of us want to make sure that there's not another level of bureaucracy, there's not another level of cost to government, and there's not the chessboard of moving papers around desks and tying people down to more policy documents, more reports and stuff like that, because all of that does have cost, Colin.
Yeah,
let's face it.
Yeah, and I would agree with you, but the Children's Services planning arrangements are currently in place. The legislation simply develops those, so there's nothing new there.
Well then, your statement that there's no cost or no significant cost hasn't been costed, and you don't really know, yes or no?
No, I don't agree with that. I'm saying based on our experience,
well, you make a statement, Colin.
Well, I'm making a statement based on our experience.
That there was no significant cost. But you haven't costed it now, you're telling us.
Our view is that it doesn't create any new structures or mechanisms and simply
Did you
facilitate.
cost it, yes or no? You made the statement, no significant cost.
I'm saying in our view, there's no
So
significant,
the answer is no,
significant
you
cost.
didn't cost it. Thank you.
Deputy Chair Chris Little.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for your presentations. I found them extremely helpful, very useful indeed. Maybe a couple of quick comments in relation to Children in Northern Ireland. I agree and support the call for a yearly report led and debated in the Assembly. I think the Office of First and Deputy First Minister evade openness too frequently with written statements rather than Assembly statements, which allows them to promote good progress that has been made as well as to see what needs to be done better. I also take on board at least the comments in terms of cumulative impact of cuts not being taken heed of in the all-party group on children and young people. Very recently we were reviewing the issue of childcare, and it became quite clear, hopefully two positive outcomes, that OFMDFM unit responsible for childcare had not been quite as sure or aware of cuts that were happening to DSD and ASF funding in relation to childcare, which they're now able to hopefully factor into provisions that they're making from childcare going forward. But one would hope and think that this bill will perhaps contribute to slightly more joined up in relation to that particular issue as well. My questions would be around the age definition and sanctions. We've kind of touched on some of the sanctions. We've said there aren't any sanctions, but one would presume there is recourse to just judicial review if necessary, although I would wholly agree. The hope would be that would be a deterrent and an encouragement to good policy rather than litigation. But previous briefings have suggested extending the age range. Would anybody have any particular view in relation to the age range that should be included, or indeed that issue of penalties?
I think with children with disabilities, then extending it to 20. In terms of sanctions, I mean, obviously the ultimate sanction is a judicial review, and that does come with costs. But the Child Poverty Act places a statutory obligation, and, you know, the officials always produce the report. It may be slightly late, but they still get the job done. So I'm really not sure in terms of what other sanctions we could include there. But I think, you know, maybe we should look at it from another point of view, that it should be the carrot and not the stick, in terms of if you work together, you're going to improve outcomes, you're going to get better results, and ultimately you could save money for that investment at the start.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Alex Maskey.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members of the deputation. Again, I think each of you have made compelling arguments for the need for much greater cooperation, and that, as I've said earlier on, I think all members live about various opinions on aspects of a bill. As it is in front of us, most people have a view that we want to see the intentions of the bill enacted and enabled. So I would just want to say as a given, I mean, the illustrations have been given, I think, are all very important, and do just help to continue just to underpin our own view that we do need to do something. So the sponsor of the bill has been made well aware that we're all very keen to see this progressing. Clearly we have to try to make sure, if you're going to do something, you need to understand clearly what we're doing and what the impacts of it may actually be. So it's around the express purpose of the bill, whatever about the good intentions, the express purpose of a bill, and how do we state that in the legislation, and outcomes that we want to see which are better than guidelines which aren't compulsory really at the end of the day. So that's what we're supposed to bookend for us, is what's the express purpose of this and what are the outcomes that we want to expect from it. And I think, Alan, yourself, you'd indicated earlier on, just want to thank all of you for, first of all, giving us the continuing evidence to underpin the wisdom of such a piece of legislation. But Alan, you can express, I thought, a bit more what's the purpose of it. You know, you stated it actually, so I wonder, could you just elaborate a wee bit on that, because that's where I think most of us will be getting their mind into, the base of all of the evidence that we get from both the stakeholders and departments and all the rest of it. Then what is the express purpose of it, and then how is it going to actually deliver, if you know what I mean. So you'd give some indications earlier on your concerns around that.
I guess I had seen it in 3 parts, and that's I broke it down. I read the bill and I broke it down to make sure that we understood what the bill was about. And for us, first of all, it was the children's strategy. Obviously, it's coming up for consultation shortly, so whatever outcomes come in from consultation would be at the heart of the bill. But it's the 2 delivery mechanisms, which is the cooperation between departments and cooperation between the agencies and the pooling of resources. But while you've got those 2 aspects of it, you also need to monitor it, and you also need to have accountability and transparency. So that is where the reporting does come into it. And that's how I'm sort of viewing the bill, that with the yearly reporting, you have a look to see what outcomes you have delivered. Are they actually turning the curve? Are they making a difference? If they're not making the difference, well, why are they not making the difference? Do we need to put money into something else that will make the difference to achieve the outcomes? So that's how I'm seeing it at the moment.
Okay, thank you.
I just maybe add something, if you wouldn't mind, Chair, about what's the purpose of it, I suppose. And I mentioned that we had information on reductions and cuts in services to children and young people. And when we asked the providers where those cuts were coming from, if I read you out a list, you'll get a sense of how easy it is for a small cut in one department. And none of this is done intentionally. I don't believe that any budget holder goes to work and says, how can I decimate services for children today? They're dealing with very difficult situations in their own departments. And people told us that they came from the Department of Education, Neighbourhood Renewal, Health and Social Care Trust, European Social Fund, Public Health Agency, the Victim and Survivor Service, the Rural Transport Fund, core funding from Health, the DOE, the Environment Agency and Pace 3. And that doesn't include things like the removal of the early years fund in DE, the removal of pathways, EMA and DEL, reductions in Sure Start and other things. So you can see how easily a cumulative impact can happen without actually individual departments being aware of it. So a bill like this, we think, will be a really positive and practical way to try and at least get some kind of handle on all of that.
You're very clear, Lisa, on this idea that nobody's taking the overarching or helicopter view.
Certainly from our experience, Gerard.
And in your submission, you made clear that you felt that the statutory duty could do away or certainly guard against duplication. But are there examples you can give us of where there currently is waste and duplication?
Yeah, well, obviously, and Mr. Spratt alluded to this, about, you know, when there are so many departments, so many organisations, voluntary and community organisations, so many public sector bodies who have responsibility for what happens to children and young people in Northern Ireland, and where they aren't working together effectively, of course there's going to be waste, of course there's going to be duplication, and I think all of us across all sectors have a vested interest in working together to ensure that that's minimised.
Alan, you in your submission made a reference which made me think that you believe the Children's Order of 95 is potentially outdated. Is this an opportunity in this bill to address that?
I think there is, certainly. You know, it's 95. We do feel that maybe an opportunity to bring it forward, to bring it into line with the change. 95 has many years have passed since 95. I think it is time for review and certainly to bring it up to date. This may be an opportunity as part of a wider movement by government, and certainly we feel it would be a timely move.
You also, Colin?
No, I don't disagree with looking at refreshing the Children Order, but I think that's an entirely separate exercise. Children Order is a very large piece of legislation. Many of the principles are sound. It does need modernised, but I don't think this bill would be the mechanism to do it.
One of the areas that we've been focused on in terms of this proposed bill is the role that would be given to the Health and Social Care Board. Does anybody have any concerns about that?
I have read Hansard and noted members' concerns of that. I think maybe input from the Department of Health may relay some of those concerns. There could also be an opportunity to amend the bill that the duty is placed on the executive, for example. That could be just one option.
Another concern which has been expressed in a general sense is a concern that maybe the bill as currently drafted doesn't actually achieve its stated aim of helping all children, but is more focused on at-risk children. Is that something anybody particularly
I'm not sure of that, because if you look at the children's strategy, which is at the heart of this bill, the children's strategy is for all children and young people and not a specific group of children and young people.
You, I think, Ellen, would like to see the requirement to pool budgets and resources extended beyond departments to agencies.
It would be helpful. It would be helpful.
Because?
Again, to improve outcomes. I do have evidence from GB in terms of pooled budgets that can deliver more efficient and effective services. So there is evidence to that.
Okay, and the final question for you is one we were discussing with the previous group, which is the fact that there are no sanctions to anybody who fails to deliver on a statutory obligation. And again, Colin, I think that's one that you had highlighted. How do we feel about the lack of sanctions?
But the ultimate sanction for any piece of legislation is a judicial review. And I still think that we should be thinking about the carrot and not the stick with this legislation, because we do ultimately, everybody agrees in principle with the bill that we want to improve outcomes for children and young people, and surely that should be at the heart of our business.
And discussions on this so far that I've heard today haven't mentioned the ultimate oversight, which is of course you, this committee and the Assembly, and your powers and responsibilities to ensure that this bill, should it pass, is implemented effectively and efficiently, and of course the other powers that sit within the Audit Office around, and Public Accounts Committee around monitoring how budgets are spent. So in terms of who gets to review it, ultimately I think probably the most important people are in this room.
And you're all in favour of annual rather than a report every 3 years?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Sorry, can I just say, in terms of the sanctions, I do think it's important not to get that sort of echoes Ellen's point about the carrot and the stick. For me, this is potentially a way of creating a more effective government, more effective delivery of services. For me, I would hope that actually what you will get is there'll be an element of peer pressure coming almost within departments. If we have an outcome to deliver, if a department are not playing ball or are not coming along, well then actually there will be sanctions from within. And as Lisa said, ultimately the Assembly would have the ultimate sanction, certainly at executive level. So I do think it's important to focus on that.
Alex?
No, it's just to make one wee final observation more than anything else, because I mean there's a bit of discussion there around whether this is the appropriate vehicle for upgrading extant legislation, and for me it's not exclusive. Obviously a timely reminder that we might need a refresh, a repeat or update aspects of legislation or other departments' policies, but this is not what this bill is about. So to do whatever policies are in existence, strategies are in existence, the purpose of this bill is to make sure that they're all cooperative with each other, and right, so that's not an exclusive issue of getting or passing this legislation.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, Alan, Lisa, Colin and Ellen, thank you all very much indeed. Appreciate your oral and written evidence. Thank you.
Thank you.
Members, the next session is with the Children's Law Centre. We had actually invited them to take part as part of this panel, but they indicated they wanted to make some comments on their own. So the clerk's brief is at page 146, and the submission from the Children's Law Centre is at page 148. It is going to be a short session that we have in mind, and we are going to be joined by Natalie Wheelahan, who is Policy Officer at the Children's Law Centre, and Rachel Hogan, who is the Special Educational Needs Representative. So we're going to try and do this in certainly no more than 20 minutes. We have the written submission, Rachel and Natalie, but I could offer you up to 2 minutes for opening remarks if you wish to take that.
Thank you. Thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to present to you today, and also to present separately so that we can offer both a policy and practice perspective on the bill. We are very much in favour of the Children's Services Cooperation Bill. We've long been an advocate of the need for a statutory duty to cooperate on government. We think it's a really unique and exciting opportunity to improve the well-being of children and young people and to advance their rights. Rachel is going to present to you a couple of examples which we feel is going to explain and illustrate the need for a strong children's rights-based statutory duty to cooperate to be introduced. And it's through learning from our casework that I have the following policy perspective. The Government has ratified the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, and the Northern Ireland Executive is obliged to deliver all of the rights contained within the Convention for Children and Young People. Legislative and policy development in Northern Ireland should be taken forward in compliance with the rights enshrined in the Convention. In particular, we would like to see explicit reference in the statutory duty on government departments and agencies to work together to meet the needs of the whole child, with the best interests of the child as the primary consideration. In line with the obligation to cooperate, again, we would agree with the earlier speakers. We'd like to see the reporting requirement being an annual one in compliance with the recommendations of the Committee of the Rights of the Child, who says that overview reports on the progress of children's rights should be produced annually. Also, we would agree that annual reporting would improve effectiveness, transparency and accountability, would result in better monitoring and data collection, and all of which would improve outcomes for children. We would like to see explicit reference as well to the need for government departments and agencies to cooperate at the earliest possible opportunity in children's lives in order to achieve better outcomes for children. We would like to see a statutory requirement on government to pool resources rather than an enabling power. There are currently examples of government departments pooling resources suggesting that this is already possible. We don't believe that the vital pooling of resources for the provision of children's services will occur unless there's a clear statutory obligation to do so.
That's 2 minutes.
Sure. Finally, we'd like to see the insertion of a clause to ensure consultation with children and young people and their parents, as well as relevant public bodies, which should include a duty to take into account views expressed through consultation. Rachel was going to give an overview of some of our cases.
It might be easier to address them through questions. I can give cases as examples.
Have you prepared some remarks?
I have some cases that I can share with you that I think you'd find useful.
Well, it's entirely up to you. I mean, it's 20 minutes if you want to use it to make the formal presentations.
I'll not speak for 20 minutes and let's give people an opportunity to ask some questions. My role in the centre is that I'm part of the legal team, and the children that I work with are children with special needs and disabilities. There are some 71,500 odd children with special needs in Northern Ireland. That's about 1 in 5 of our school population. So the issues that I'm concerned with generally relate to education and health, and the lack of the duty to cooperate has impacted on the children that I deal with quite severely in some of the cases that I've been involved in. The primary message that I would like to leave with the committee today is that this legislation should have inserted into it the principle of the best interests of the child. It should be child rights compliant to enable the executive to comply with their own duties under the CRC, which the government has ratified. That could be done in the duty to say that the purpose of the legislation is to ensure the meeting of the best interests of children. This, after all, is why we want to ask government departments to exercise their functions in such a way that they meet the best interests of children and young people. And I don't think anybody around this table who deals with constituents on a daily basis and tries to help them in these types of cases would disagree that the best interests of the child ought to be a primary consideration when funding decisions are being made from the top of the tree right down to when daily, day-to-day operational decisions are being made with the child. I've taken the views of some of the parents that I've dealt with to try and express to you the dehumanising effect of the current system, which does not comply with the rights of children nor with the rights of parents to act as advocates for their children. I think it's best for me to tell you some of the things that parents have passed on to me on this topic. One mother of a child that I've been dealing with since she was 12, she's now 17, and her name is Carla. And one thing I do want to ask the committee to do, if you would take 3 more minutes of your time at a later point, is to go on to our website on our homepage and look at a video that Carla has made, because by doing that in 2 minutes and 24 seconds you will learn far more than I could tell you in 20 minutes or in 20 hours. A link to that has been circulated to the clerk, so it should be easy to access it. Her mother is talking about the situation that they faced through not having that cooperation between health and education. She says that her daughter's an academically able student with severe cerebral palsy. Wouldn't it have been great if all government departments involved in her care had actually cooperated in her best interests? It took 2 years and 8 months, a tribunal, threat of judicial review, suffering for my daughter and unbelievable strain placed on us and a family before she was provided with physiotherapy in school. It's clear to me that specialist provision for most children with special needs would be cheaper for Northern Ireland PLC and would serve them better. More importantly, why do we need legislation to make that happen? But we do. Now, this little girl at 12 with cerebral palsy was being asked to sit in her wheelchair in a mainstream school for 8 hours per day without having any physical activity, which would be very damaging to a child with cerebral palsy, as one might imagine, and can have lifelong health effects. Her grades started to drop very dramatically, and she wasn't able to keep up with her peers or meet her true potential. We had to then engage in a long-ranging legal battle, which ought to have been completely unnecessary, in order to get this child physical activity in school every day. And what that consisted of was a couple of sessions of physiotherapy, swimming lessons, and floor exercises for her. So it was actually a very simple solution after 2 years and 8 months of wrangling. And the difficulty really arose because the funding streams between education and health are discrete. Education didn't want to acknowledge that physiotherapy was an educational provision, and health didn't want to provide physiotherapy in a mainstream school. It would have been much easier for them if she'd gone to a special school, for example, which also impacts on the inclusion of that child in mainstream. So I think that I would really like it if the committee would take the time to listen to Carla herself in her own words. She's 17 now, and she's become a fantastic advocate for children's rights through her own experience. And I think she can speak louder than I can as a lawyer as to what it's like to be a child in that situation. Another case that I wanted to share with you is a case of a young primary school child in the early years of primary school who has Down syndrome and who required another health therapy again in the school situation. And we had to take a tribunal in order to access the health therapy within a special school on this occasion. And we got a tribunal order to say that he should have therapy X times per week for a certain amount of time. It's the educational authority's duty to arrange that with health. But because there was no duty to cooperate, there was no cooperation. This child didn't have OT for a year, even though he'd been assessed as needing it. They had the tribunal process, and then health refused to comply with the tribunal order. They said they didn't agree and they weren't going to provide it. That would have left education having to employ a private therapist had we not been able to resolve it. How did we resolve it? We had to threaten judicial review against education. Now, that's not an ideal situation. I feel that we shouldn't have had to have those conversations at all. Now, the duty to cooperate, to my mind, is about a sea change, a complete culture change in the thinking of all of our departments, agencies, and anyone who's working with children, including schools. That partnership working is the key to success with these children. Meeting the best interest of children requires the duty to be placed at the top of the triangle and then to filter down through the structures that flow from that to the child who is sitting in the classroom, falling behind their peers and suffering discrimination. I'd like to finish with the view of another parent here. And I said to you at the start that there's a dehumanising experience for these parents. Parents ring us up day and daily, sobbing. They have a child who has a disability, who has special educational needs. They're trying to come to terms with that, and then they realise that they've got a full-time job of administration and trying to find that help, chasing education, chasing health, chasing a medical profession, whoever it might be. And what this parent says is that I would hate to think that in future my children will be fighting the same battles for my grandchildren. I get so frustrated as our children are suffering needlessly on a daily basis. It's logical as well as rational to expect cooperation and communication between government departments in relation to provision of services to children. It's so difficult for us as parents to navigate our way through a system where there is no accountability. We stroke egos and nurse them to ensure good relations with service providers. We accept inadequate support because it's better than no support. The children themselves are overlooked. Decisions are made regarding our children by professionals who have briefly or never met our children, whilst we sit outside closed doors. Another issue that I would like to raise with the committee is that the legislation itself does not have a provision, unlike the English version of the duty to cooperate, to take into account parents. And parents are a very important part of that process of cooperation because they know their child better than anyone else. And to put it succinctly, when people work together in a collaborative process and people from different disciplines share their expertise, you're much more likely to get a sensible outcome and to avoid duplication of labour and to avoid wastage of time in answering emails from the Children's Law Centre and defending judicial reviews. We don't take legal action lightly. We take legal action when it's required to meet the best interests of children. I'd be happy to take any questions that you might have on that.
Thank you very much indeed. With regard to the Bill's reference to the 6 high-level outcomes contained in the current 10-year strategy, can I be clear you're suggesting a change in phraseology to the high-level specified outcomes of the children's strategy currently operative, and that the intent of that is simply to say if there is a new strategy which has different outcomes, it's covered? Yes. On a more substantive point, perhaps, is your reference, Natalie, to the obligations on the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. Are you arguing that that would be the better measure as opposed to the 6 high-level outcomes?
It would be our view, and certainly we're going to be entering into the consultation process on the new children's strategy, that it should be based on the UNCRC. So I would see them as one and the same, really. The UNCRC at the minute, the UNCRC is supposedly the underpinning of the children's strategy as it currently operates anyway. So they're very closely interlinked already. We would like to see the statutory duty within the Children's Services Cooperation Bill making explicit reference to the best interest of the child, which comes directly from Article 3 of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, but also can be found across various pieces of our own domestic legislation, such as the Children Order, and is going to be proposed in the new Justice Bill in terms of the aims of the justice system. So for us, it's really about the government moving closer towards realising children's rights through the children's strategy, but also through this legislation, and delivering better outcomes for children.
As I understand it, a lot of work went into drawing up that strategy, and as you say, the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child was the kind of underpinning document. Are you critical then of these 6 high-level outcomes, or what?
No. I mean, I am just nervous about going into a consultation process with the decision made before we have the consultation. It might well be at the end of the consultation process in the children's strategy everyone's perfectly happy with the 6 high-level outcomes, but it might be that changes are required. It is 10 years old, or it might be that changes are required in 10 years' time. We're really keen to future-proof this legislation, and it would be, I think, more sensible to maybe take the outcomes out and refer generally to the high-level outcomes of the children's strategy rather than name them on the face of the bill.
You've also highlighted that there are some issues which rest with the Northern Ireland Office, not least immigration, refugee, asylum issues, but these, by definition, therefore, are not devolved. How can we legislate to cover something that isn't within our competence?
We can't. I mean, there are constitutional issues in relation to that, and I did flag that up in our written submission. It really was just to highlight that as an issue for the committee, and to highlight that as an issue for OFMDFM as well. There will be services that won't come within the scope of this because because those issues aren't devolved, and it was just really to flag those up.
You, along with others, are recommending that we should have statutory guidelines on foot of this bill. What's your rationale for that?
We have experience in dealing with statutory guidelines in the area of special educational needs and disability. I think that's been alluded to earlier by other speakers. And we find that as long as it's statutory guidance, so there's a duty to have regard to it at the very least as part of the legislation, then it does hold sway with decision makers. It helps in that culture change, but it also allows people to know how to comply with their obligations if they have explanations and examples as to what good practice looks like. It is guidance, it's not written in stone, but it does hold sway. And we have found when we have taken matters before the courts will always have regard to statutory guidance as well. And that in itself, I think, helps people knowing that there is oversight by the courts and knowing that statutory guidance has a level of importance, therefore.
You also say you'd like to see a definition of functions in the bill. Why is that?
Well, that was just an example. We'd like to see a definition. The purpose of the guidance really is to provide everybody with a clear understanding of what is expected of them, what their obligations are under the bill, and definitions to be included of what is meant by some of the terms. We did flag up functions and refer the committee in our submission to the definition of functions under Section 75 of the Northern Ireland Act in an interest to be helpful. Because that's something that obviously the drafters are going to have to look at as to what is meant by functions.
Okay, time's nearly up. Jimmy?
Thanks, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. Just in terms of previously Daniel Greenberg, who is an expert and he's a former member of the Office of Parliamentary Counsel. You probably read the evidence that he gave to the committee.
Yeah.
I mean, he had some key areas of concern with this legislation in the way that it's presently drafted. He suggested that it was difficult to ascertain what the impact was on the lives of children and young people would be. Also, and I think it's one of the areas that you've just maybe covered, the inclusion of policy outcomes in the legislation, he suggests is inappropriate and would be better placed in a strategy document. Using them in legislation could lead to misinterpretation, challenge and judicial review, is the view of Mr. Greenberg, who obviously is an expert in the area. Would you agree?
I think looking at the way that that clause is drafted, certainly you can see that it could be adapted or other devices could be employed to make it more usable. I think it is difficult to measure what those specified outcomes were. And I agree to an extent with what he said. Certainly, I think that it could be said to be vague. But would that then spark judicial reviews? Not necessarily, because I think the annual reporting process is if it is an annual reporting process, would be very important in this, because it can set out indicators, preferably child rights indicators, as to how these outcomes are being met and how to measure progress. So they can be further defined through those measurements. But I think, yes, I can understand why there would be some concerns about the way that that is drafted, and we agree with that to an extent. I think further work could be done on it, and I understand there is access now to the Office of Legislative Counsel, and they can employ expertise to that. It's not my area of expertise either. Hands up, children's rights lawyer, not Legislative Counsel.
Despite what I said about fat cat lawyers.
Oh, yes, I'm not one of them anymore, no, but
other types of lawyers are available.
Yes, there's a range of services.
In terms of the reporting process, finally, Chair, and it being done annually, I think annually is the best method on a yearly basis. And, you know, we're worried about the level of bureaucracy, or another level of bureaucracy, or another level of taking money away from a pooled pot. We'll say it's a pooled pot now, and taking that away to employ people to do a yearly process in the various departments. Is that an appropriate use of public money?
I understand that concern completely, and I would have similar concerns, but my experience has been what gets measured.
How do we get around it?
I'll tell you. What gets measured gets done, I think. I think that if we build the annual reporting process into this from the very outset, then it shouldn't be onerous and it shouldn't be bureaucratic, because actually it should be a consideration of all government departments and agencies as they're doing their work from a day-to-day basis, how they are fulfilling children's rights and how they are fulfilling the best interests of children. So that should be an ongoing consideration as it is. It doesn't have to be a hugely onerous report. That it certainly shouldn't take away from doing the job of work that has to be done, but it is about being clever about how we prepare for that annual reporting, and that should be built in at the beginning, I believe. The other issue that you raised it was around removing money from an ever-dwindling pot, and I actually believe that that's the purpose of this. I mean, our experience has been that money is being wasted and having to, you know, threaten judicial reviews, as Rachel explained, and take tribunals, where that's absolutely unnecessary. If we could get government departments and agencies to cooperate better and provide services to really provide better outcomes for children, then, you know, there's huge amounts of savings to be made there, I believe, and that money could be far better spent. I totally agree with you. We're, you know, that's where the inefficiency lies, and it's not about creating another tool to beat government with. This is about doing things smarter and doing things better and creating better outcomes for children ultimately.
Our time is up, but Alex did indicate, if you want to
Very brief, Chair. Again, thank you both for your very important evidence you've given us this afternoon. I mean, I'm just taking it from reading your submission and the points that you've made. You would actually want the legislation, but also tightened up a bit and around, because you do refer to the designated and include statutory bodies. I take it that, and then Rachel, I think you refer to parents as well to be included in these things, and also I presume that means you'd agree with introducing the need to deal with NGOs as well, who are also having some of these responsibilities. And you also refer to statutory obligation, making it a statutory obligation to pool resources. So we're right in saying, generally speaking, you're supportive of the bill, you also want to tighten up in certain aspects, and you can identify some of those today.
Yeah, because the way that we see it is this is a great opportunity. We want to tighten things up. We want to place an onus on government, because actually our experience is that it's not happening and it needs to happen. And I think Rachel's cases are great examples of, you know, what really needs to happen in order to stop those things from happening again.
Thank you very much. Okay, Natalie, Rachel, thank you both very much.
Thank you very much.
Members, so to page 169 for papers for the final session, and that's the clerk's brief with regard to NILGA, the Local Government Association. They have a submission starting at 171, and at 176 is a submission from the Department of the Environment, which also raises concerns about how the bill intersects with community planning. So for this final session with NILGA, I think we will have 3 people in front of us. Karen Smith, who is their Head of Policy. Councillor Sean McPeak is their Vice President. And Elaine Black is the Children and Young People's Officer with Belfast City Council. So Sean, Karen and Elaine, you are all very welcome. Who's making the opening comments?
Councillor McPeak.
Chair, thank you. Thank you, Chair. Well, you see by my nameplates here who's along with me. It's Elaine Black, who's Children and Young People's Manager in Belfast City Council, and Karen Smith, who's Policy Officer for NILGA. So, just begin, Chair, by thanking the committee for giving NILGA the opportunity to speak about the Children's Services Cooperation Bill. We've already provided the committee with a short briefing to accompany our evidence today, but I would like to take a couple of minutes to highlight a few issues before the main part of the discussion. We strongly welcome this bill, and particularly the intent to encourage departments to cooperate and to enable them to pool budgets. The bill appears to us robust in its attempt to address issues relating to lack of strategy, delivery and over-reliance on goodwill. There are a number of examples across government of areas of work that would have been made more effective through better cross-departmental cooperation, such as delivery of neighbourhood renewal strategy. NILGA was keen to ensure that the new local government community planning function was strengthened by inclusion in the Local Government Act of a statutory duty for departments to participate in and contribute to the process. Unfortunately, we would say that our attempts have met with limited success. We're therefore extremely interested in the development of this bill, which, if it passes as currently worded, will set precedents of cooperation and resourcing that we can build on across government. However, clarification will be necessary as to how departmental cooperation and particularly how the pooling of budgets will operate. We're particularly interested in the proposed actions to be taken should departments or agencies fail to comply with the requirements of the bill. Would sanctions be imposed, and if so, who by? An additional concern is the failure of the bill to acknowledge or address the potential synergies, overlaps, conflicts or gaps within community planning, and this is perhaps more an issue of timing than anything else, as a number of key policy instruments for community planning are still in the development stage. Issues of this nature that NILGA has already identified are in relation to the definition of children and young people and the lack of reference to the role that they can play. We would encourage the committee to liaise with the Department of Environment as this bill is developing almost in tandem with the guidance on community planning. I would also draw the committee's attention to the recent formation of the Political Partnership Panel, which all ministers are entitled to attend, with elected representatives from the 11 councils and ILGA. A work plan for the panel is in development, and it's intended to examine how we can work together more effectively in central and local government to achieve better outcome for the citizen. The next partnership panel meeting is on the 28th of April, and we would sincerely hope that OFMDFM ministers will be in attendance, as we will be discussing the Carnegie Wellbeing Framework and its potential for informing the development of the next more outcome-focused programme for government, which will again impact on the intent of this bill. We'll be happy to answer any questions the committee may have, particularly my colleagues Elaine and Karen. If there is an issue we're unable to address directly today, I will ensure that we'll get back to you as soon as possible as we can after the meeting.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Sean. One of the things you said was you're surprised at the lack of reference to the role for children and young people in the bill. How would you fix that?
Perhaps it would be useful if I reflect on how Belfast City Council has engaged their young people in an outcomes approach to children and young people services. Roughly 10 years ago, councillors made a commitment that children and young people were a priority, and in the last 2 years they have agreed an outcomes approach should be taken with that. So we have engaged Belfast Youth Forum, and they have helped shape both the pilot and now what our outcomes look like for children and young people within the council. So we think that there is opportunity, and I know that Nikki would impress upon this too, that there are a number of opportunities to have a parallel and fully integrated process at the same time of involving children at each stage of the engagement and using CINE's Ask First standards. I think there's a whole lot of tools already in place to try and support that.
I think I'm right in saying ILGA have a role on the CYPSP, the Children and Young People Strategic Partnership. How do you define that?
Chair, I'm not sure that we do. I think that the local government representation on that partnership is actually through SOLAS. There would be the chief executives that would attend that partnership. So there's an operational input from local government on that, and I think maybe Elaine would be able to reflect better on how that partnership's working.
So it's SOLAS rather than ILGA?
It would be.
SOLAS are represented on CYPSP at a regional level, and some of the issues that may well need to be considered are that each council really has a different identity and approach, and Belfast certainly has an investment in children and young people in a very dedicated way with a play service and a youth forum. So it's obviously, and it's still a bigger size of population that it serves. So if you were looking at how things operate, CYPSP, it would probably be useful to try and make sure there is a way to engage all of the councils. The outcomes group, which is the geographical structures really that which I sit on behalf of the council, brings in all the partners at a Belfast level, and now I think it's aligning towards it's still aligned to the trust, but it will bring together the 11 council model. What you'll find is that some of the issues in relation to that structure is not all the government departments would be represented at that level if in particular they are delivering children and young people services or funding them, and secondly the community and voluntary sector there's only a certain number of representatives there, so there's probably opportunity to try and create better links there.
You've highlighted a concern, I think I can characterise it as, over the lack of statutory duties as currently constituted and how that might impact on community planning. Could you expand on that for me?
I think, Chair, there are a number of different concerns in relation to the statutory duty. There's the question mark over whether or not a statutory duty is actually useful, given the inability necessarily to impose sanctions if the statutory duty is not complied with. I mean, certainly in circumstances such as the Sustainable Development Strategy, whenever sustainable development became a statutory responsibility, we established that the only way of holding public bodies and departments to account for that was if for example, Friends of the Earth or another ENGO or someone like that took a judicial review against that department or body. In relation to community planning, I think that we have repeatedly requested that as that overarching relationship between local government and central government takes place and forms, that government departments should be required to be statutory partners within community planning process. The Environment Minister Durkan did write out to the other government departments to try to bring them closer into the process in the development of the Community Planning Partners Order. Unfortunately, I think there was one department came back and was very willing to be a statutory partner. I think that was DSD, and the other departments were much less willing. I think the difficulty in Northern Ireland is that public service delivery is much more fragmented than it is in other places. Councils are responsible for less and are more reliant on service delivery arms of government departments, and that adds to the complexity here. In relation to, particularly in relation to children's services, if you look at what happens in Scotland, councils are much more responsible for a wider remit in relation to children's and young people's services, and have actually a greater ability to bring government departments into the fold, but they are still looking at how to put budgets and how to have people working effectively within the community planning process. So we felt it very, very important to tie departments in as strongly as possible, but we find it very difficult, and we see this as a first step. And if this is successful, if this goes through, this really does set a precedent for that, and may enable us to go back and say, well, you know, it's happening for children's services, why can't it happen in a more overarching way for community planning?
Let's deal with sanctions, because we've discussed this with other groups. One theory that has been put to us is, you know, beyond judicial reviews, the ultimate sanction are the people sitting around this table. Although we might argue there is a sanction beyond that called the electorate. What is your view on sanctions?
Well, personally, the experience that we've got is that the first question in a resource-strapped environment, which councils face and which obviously government departments face, is what is the sanction if we don't do this? What happens if we don't do it? Do we have to do it? Is it required? And if it's required, that's one thing, and you will find that councils who have a statutory duty will perform that duty. But you still get the question, what is the sanction? And for some of the outgoing councils, I know that there were things that they should have done that they didn't do because they knew there was no real sanction. And naming and shaming is all very well, but some councils and some bodies and some departments and some people have very broad shoulders and can take the naming and shaming to a certain extent. So
you're suggesting to us that the question is asked, okay, this is a statutory duty, what's the sanction for non-compliance? And if the answer is there isn't one, it's not a priority.
What's the point in statutory duty?
I think there could be opportunities, though, to try. I know at a high level it looks very much like that, but if you have a wraparound service for each child, then there are people already accountable, whether it's in social services or education or whatever. And I think when you're trying to look at, well, how will this work? They already are accountable with standards of working whereby they have to create and complete reports in a certain time and all the rest of it. So there are windows of opportunity of how we do get people to do things differently. It's building it up to where it's politically accountable. And how do people like myself not let you down in that we make sure that we are compliant? And I think that's around a culture. The opposite of the sanction is the culture, creating the culture where the willing can freely flow, and those who aren't so willing is that at least you get a minimum standard of compliance from them.
There is going to be a requirement if this bill becomes law for a report. It might be once every 3 years. Others are arguing for annually. Is that not a sanction if that report says that X agency, Y department or Z council failed in their statutory duties? Water off a duck's back, is it, Karen?
It could be in some circumstances. Some councils will do everything within their power to make sure that they comply with the statutory duty, and they will not want to be named and shamed, as it were. And I would imagine that particularly for the new councils, they will not want to start off their life as new council being named and shamed. My point is that if there is a particular, for example, a resource consideration for a public body or for a department, that it may be the lesser of two evils for them.
Okay, thank
I suppose there are a number of examples that might be worthwhile looking back on in terms of where currently there may be European sanctions forming for the Assembly in terms of compliance and what lessons that has taught us, and perhaps even something as simple as the scores in the doors that we operate for other things might actually be a way to look at performance.
We touched on the definition of young people, and nobody to date who's given evidence today had an issue with the 2003 order, which is under 18 or under 21 if you have needs. But you are not, as a group of councils, consistent. And my understanding, under 25 could be a definition.
The question really for me was that finding what the definition was, and I suppose when I'm stuck we would look towards UNCRC for guidance, which is around 21. Belfast City Council, generally my remit would be dedicated services for 4 to 18-year-olds. But we do still deliver family services or fund them, and we equally provide employability opportunities for over 18s and support a student body and population in the city. So there is we are undecided, I think, but we are mindful that that is still something that needs to be reflected on.
David.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thank you for your contributions so far. I'm very glad, Sean, that you made mention of the Carnegie Trust towards a wellbeing framework. I think it's probably one of the best documents that's been produced in about 5 decades at least, and the fact that I was part of the roundtable is not influencing that opinion in any shape or form. But I think in all seriousness, the whole approach of outcome-focused government is, I think, slots in really well with what we're looking at today and what in this piece of proposed legislation, because I think the one thing that unites everybody on this issue is that the principle of what the bill is trying to achieve we support, and we want that to happen. I think what we all are a little bit unsure of is around how it can actually be achieved and how we can get the outcome as opposed to just being seen to do something about it. And a lot of the expert advice that we have been getting around how the bill in its current form has been drafted is that there's been some concerns raised around our interpretation and how that could cause some difficulties. In the broader legislative process, we also have a problem where this is a first draft, ultimately a first draft. And whenever you unpick one piece of legislation or one clause within a piece of legislation, it has a domino effect that other parts of it then have to be amended. And I think most of us are predicting around this table, certainly from the legislative side, that there's almost an inevitability that by the time this bill gets to final stage, it's going to look very, very different to how it looks now, because there are government departments that are named which are going to find themselves looking at a proposed statute that is going to place certain obligations upon them that they may feel for whatever reason they may not be able to achieve, or is going to put a burden on them that is beyond what they will be able to achieve. And therefore the question, we've had some discussions with previous contributors today around, is it necessary for this to be put through as a piece of legislation? Or are there more outcome-focused ways in which what we want to achieve can be achieved? Because what we want to avoid is a bad bill at the end of this, which is just going to make this situation worse. And I personally believe, and I'm sure I'm no different than anybody else, when it comes particularly to our children and young people, we cannot afford to get this wrong. So we have to get this right, ideally in the first go. So in that context, I mean, obviously you're here representing local government, which, you know, is undergoing a major transition at the moment. A major redistribution of power is now being handed, particularly around planning issues and so on, from here to local government. Where do you feel, if we find ourselves in a position that the legislative avenue is not the right direction to go, and I'm not writing it off at this stage entirely, but in a hypothetical sense, where do you think local government could find its place in contributing to help achieve the outcomes that this bill wants to achieve? And what do you think the overall distribution of responsibilities would look like? Because local government, to be fair, as I look through the draft bill, kind of gets off quite lightly on this. You know, all the government departments, or a lot of the government departments are mentioned, police are mentioned, justice, health, education, and they're all very, very important, very important contributors to this. But you get off quite light. So what would you see, I mean, if we were sitting down to rewrite this bill again in a final form, where do you think local government could step in and provide a real, meaningful, tangible contribution to this that ultimately would move towards an outcome that we want to see?
There may be parts of that I could answer immediately, others I might have to think about, but I think the whole point of an outcomes approach is, for children and young people, is that everybody has to be involved and equally involved. And I think from my perspective, being involved in the Belfast Outcomes Group, at times the fit doesn't really fit local government, and that would be something we would be keen to be mindful of. One of the major focuses, if there wasn't a legislation around it, would be one plan and one pooled budget. But to have a pooled budget, you need to have the right procurement in order to enable yourself to say that if an outcome's not being reached by a service provider, that it can be stopped. And we and yourselves struggle with being able to be in that position, and the impact that would have perhaps on other people providing. So we feel at the minute that if I was to answer you one plan, that I don't have a range of different pots of money coming through down to local government, and I do understand there's a lot of conversations at the moment to strengthen local and central government links, which is great. The second thing is that, I suppose, and it won't really give you the answer you perhaps are looking for, we currently sit with discretionary involvement, and Belfast took the chance and has been inspired by its politicians to clearly put children and young people as a priority. And in doing so, though, I still have a long journey, because it's taken me 2 years to actually get that from one place to another. And now we're really this is the end of our first year, and we're really 2 more years down the line. So a lot of that needs to be, that's just us driving it. And perhaps another issue that would be helpful if there is no legislation is drivers. I have the luxury of having a senior manager who is a champion for children and young people, and I have every political party who chooses to have a named representative in Belfast City Council as a children and young people champion, and I have staff then on officers who operate in that way for each department. Those are crucial things for me, but the problem we have is making sure we don't have an overkill of structures around all of that. So I think a clear one focus approach would probably be useful, but being mindful that we're sitting currently with discretion, and of 11 councils, where are they? They all have a different approach to what they're doing.
I think just to build on what Elaine has said, and I know that a number of you have been looking at what happens elsewhere in relation to this, and for example in Scotland. Certainly the last time I was up with this committee, we were talking at a certain degree about the Scotland Performs and single outcome agreements and things like that. And I think that there's a huge piece of work that needs to be done there, and is starting with Carnegie, as you say. We're looking at well-being and outcomes. And certainly I think Scotland has been in the lucky position of having had this piece of work develop over time. So you've got community planning, and then you've had to sort of getting right for each child, or whatever. Yes, I think that's the right name for the programme. So that one has fed into the other, and then with Scotland Performs, you have a set of agreed outcomes at regional level that are then reflected at local level as well. So you've everybody going in the same direction. You've all their departments going in the same direction. People are looking to achieve agreed outcomes. And I think that a big piece of work that's going to be needed to be done here is overcoming silo approaches, both in local government and in central government, to move towards that sort of single outcome agreement approach. The difficulty with this bill is, as we've outlined in our briefing, is that if we have what we need for one small area for children's services, it kind of skews what we're trying to achieve in a more general way, and it might be better looking at pooling of budgets and departmental cooperation in the round rather than on one particular issue, and saying that you're right, this is an extremely important issue and we don't want to see it fall by the wayside either. So there is a balancing act there that is required, and I don't envy you your position in trying to come up with the right way of acting. But certainly that sort of regional, local working and how that goes forward is going to be key in making sure that this is actually works on the ground.
I think the position we have taken is that although there are 6 regional outcomes, and I know there's some conversation sometimes about their vagueness or not, but we would say that they could easily really be very much operational outcomes for us. In Belfast, aligned to the political aspirations that councillors have, we are suggesting that the commitment, the outcomes we have are each child reaches their potential in Belfast, the place to be to do it. So they're actually further high level than really, but that's really where we're using the political leadership, if you like, that can actually say this is our role in outcomes-led work. So there is merit in that, and that similarly up here, you know, you have the political aspiration, and perhaps Sweden has a model which looks at an outcomes approach to children and young people where the 3 areas are attitudes, knowledge and working together, and use clearly the political messages. The attitude is a shared attitude and aspiration. The knowledge is there. We have systems that really could be aligned to create a better approach to understanding what's happening each child along their journey. The one struggle that there is with the culture and creating a discipline is around how we as officers serve in every department and every level to contribute to that. Okay. And the opposite of that would then be in America, where it's highly technological, that people are creating scorecards all over the place, and now, so there's variations there, and I know that further work's going on in those areas of exploring.
The final comment and question falls to Alex.
Thank you, Chair. Just I suppose briefly, just to repeat the point from David early on, I mean, I think we're all around the table very keen to see the potential of this to work most effectively. I'm kind of reading, it's more of an observation, I suppose, from my end. Maybe you might get some response, but I'm trying to think out how do we grapple with, how do we make it as effective as at all possible, because you have, I think in your contribution today, in your submission, you're pointing to almost like either conflicts, tensions or conundrums around, you know, what predetermined outcomes is there handed down to you in terms of community planning. The idea is for the councillor is to determine as best they can for their locality. So there's issues around how does it impact on community planning, what are the obligations via that process. Then there's a kind of like the statutory duty which then be imposed as a good thing, or how can it be made into an effective tool. And this whole question of a definition of what children are, and you've given examples of how Belfast Council has been proactive around this and have champions, so they're for it, they're up for it, they want to do something, maybe even more than what's going to be in the bill, but other councils may not be in the same place, I don't know. So do you want, I mean, you actually suggest, as Nilga offered up an idea that these things should be predetermined, or is it much discretion be left as all possible?
I think, Chair,
in terms of getting the balance of the bill, can we make the bill more tighter or more authoritative, have a use of that word.
I think, Chair, what we've outlined in our response is the issues for us is mainly about timing, because it's all coming together and they're not, the two tracks of work aren't reading across to each other. And that's the main problem, because if you look at the community planning guidance, which I think is still in draft, I'm not sure it's been published yet, it very much says, look, you need to take into consideration your responsibilities from government and all the different strategies and policies that you have to take it on board as you formulate your community plan. So Belfast, other councils, I think Mid-Ulster, fairly far along with your community planning as well. This stuff's happening already, and we've got a bill that's coming to us that may radically change what happens at local level for children and young people. That's not necessarily a bad thing. I'm just saying it would be useful to design out that potential conflict now, rather than letting the two things develop without looking at each other. And certainly, you know, I mean, as you've seen, as Elaine has explained very eloquently, Belfast and other councils are already doing this work anyway, and possibly, as you say, far in advance of what's going to be required in the bill. But the difficulty for everything we do at council level, trying to make an impact at local level, is making sure that our partners in government are actually tied in and delivering and walking the same direction that the same state as us, and willing to contribute.
I think if you consider the, where do you start, what do you bite off, and I think that realistically, if this bill is coming and it's welcomed by the sector and yourselves in the main, the reality is it provides that focus on children and young people, which often is the priority for most people, to intervene early in people's lives, to give them the best start of life and put less pressure, if you like, in terms of the support that the governments need to find. So I think if there's I would look for opportunities and being quite practical about it. If the bill's coming and it allows for an integrated approach to be tested, then as long as the resources are attached to it, then I think that there's still opportunity there for the parallel processes, because you know there will be other priorities under community planning as well.
Good point. Good point to finish on. So can I thank you for coming today and for your written submission, Sean and Elaine and Karen. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
So that completes the substantive business, members. Is there any other business to be raised? If not, can I just remind you that next week we're meeting on Monday at 12:15 here in room 30. And with that reminder, the meeting is adjourned.